Hello, welcome to Beyond Words Presents. Today we are here with Kate Otto, the author of our upcoming book, Everyday Ambassador, Making a Difference by Connecting in a Disconnected World. She's also the founder of Everyday Ambassador, the organization, who is completely committed to finding the value of human connection. And I'm just so excited to talk with you, Kate, because your book is phenomenal. We're so excited about it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Whitney. I'm really, really happy to be here. Very excited.
Well, I just want to make sure everybody out there knows that if you would like to participate in the conversation, you can use the Google Hangouts app. And please follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube page. So, Kate, the first question that I have is kind of the obvious one. What is an everyday ambassador?
Sure. Yeah, so an everyday ambassador, when you think about the word ambassador, it strikes you as someone who's crossing country borders and represents a country, and it's kind of an elite position. So everyday ambassador is really the idea of an everyday person who's making these human connections, and not just across borders of nationality like we traditionally think, but across borders of socioeconomic status or race or religion or being from a different place or having a different political opinion. And it's really all about someone who sees value in connecting with people who are different from them.
That's fantastic. I immediately go to, well, of course I'm that. I mean, why do I need a book about this? Why is there an organization about this? What is it that you're, I don't know, fighting against? Not exactly the right word, but what is your crusade? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, no, great question. And it's so true. Whenever we hear about human connection and how important it is, we nod our heads. Like, of course, obviously it's important. And like you said, most of us feel like we do this in our everyday lives or try to do this in our everyday lives. But the truth is that I think that it's become very difficult to forge human connections. To some extent, it always has been. When we have differences between us and other people, could be fear involved or misunderstanding involved. But I put forth in the book that particularly in an age where we're more digitally connected than ever before, sometimes that digital connection actually makes us less prepared to be good human connectors. And in the book, I really break down the different reasons why that's the case. Not to say that we can't connect digitally. There are a lot of great ways we can do that, but there's also some specific ways that getting conditioned to digital interaction can make us a little bit worse off in the human field.
So the one platform, of course, that pops to mind immediately is Facebook. I was one of those that was in the very, very beginning of Facebook when it was created, and I guess I've grown up with that, and so it's just always been an inherent part of my existence. I am one that does not like to post to Facebook very much, but it seems like the ideal place to connect with people. I mean, you can post pictures about things you're doing. You can share, about a vacation with everybody all at the same time. So why not?
Yeah. So whenever I think about why technology, why not technology, when to use, when not to use, I go back to this golden rule that I've kind of come across, and I learned it when I was working in Indonesia. As you know, and as the audience might not know, I'm a global public health consultant and have been for many years, which means I work on healthcare projects in communities all over the world. And when I was working in Indonesia once on an HIV/AIDS program, there was an office that I was working out of, a community-based healthcare, and there were some desktop computers in the office where social workers would finish their work for the day and then type in their data. But of course, the computers were connected to the internet, so there was also Facebook available, and you'd oftentimes find people sitting around on Facebook, perhaps instead of doing their work, as happens to all of us. And so the person who runs the organization had put signs above the computers that said, technology is meant to connect us to people who are far away and not create new distances between people who are already close. And so when I think about, as you said, the example of Facebook, indeed it helps us connect to people who are far away, and that's beautiful. And I can't even tell you how many people I've met abroad who I've been able to not just stay in touch with, but actually maintain a really meaningful relationship with because Facebook exists. And also being able to contribute to causes like the earthquake in Nepal, being able to share information, connecting with people who otherwise you wouldn't is really the key there. The trouble that happens sometimes more has to do with the way that we behave in these spaces. So I'll give you one example that I use quite often. You would think that places like Facebook, which expose us to so many different points of view and so many different articles and links would make us more empathetic and understanding people, because we're exposed to more, so clearly we'd understand more about each other. But in fact, that's often not the case, right? So what happens with Facebook is that if we see anything that comes across our feed that we don't like, that makes us feel uncomfortable, or that we think goes against our beliefs, we can just hide it from our Facebook wall, or we can unfollow that person or defriend that person. And I've seen that happen a lot, in particular in the past year with all the different civil rights issues going on in America, issues that people have with the justice system, and I think that will continue as there continue to be different issues that come up within our own country and abroad. So the challenge is that when you do that, although it makes you feel more comfortable, it also kind of puts you in an echo chamber where you're only following people who believe what you believe and who think what you think. So you might not realize it, but you get used to that. You get used to being in that space, and so then once you're offline, confronted with something that's very different, you might not be as prepared to deal with that if you've otherwise ignored it.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking about in my own personal world, like I don't discuss politics with anybody. I don't discuss really much of anything with anybody. I don't actually actively bring it up. I do listen to the radio and I hear a lot of news about things, but I don't engage with the conversation, perhaps because of exactly what you're saying, is that I don't know that I know how to carry on. I guess the nervousness comes because I'm like, I don't want to bring this up because I don't know that I know enough about it to have an intelligent conversation.
And also, I think both of it is a kind of fear of not knowing enough, or not wanting to offend someone. But then at the same time, like, it's really important that we're able to say to people, I don't know the answer to this, or I don't know a lot about it, but I'd love to hear your opinion, or I'd love to discuss it, not just for the sake of arguing or discussing, but because we actually broaden our horizons and become more empathetic, understanding people when we can have conversations, even if we're never going to agree with someone. And this is what I try to emphasize in a lot of the writing I did on my blog, on the Everyday Ambassador blog, during some of these issues, was that it's understandable that people can make you feel not only insulted by their opinion, but they can make you feel threatened by their opinion. And of course, if you're ever feeling threatened, you should avoid situations where you could be hurt. But if it's a matter of just being insulted and not liking someone's opinion, I always encourage people to just try to understand more. Try to understand where that person's coming from, why that opinion developed. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It doesn't mean you have to endorse it. And ultimately, you still might really think that that person is either misguided or is lacking some knowledge, but you'll understand better, because oftentimes there might be an important reason why they think that. And if you're able to understand that, you might actually find common ground you otherwise wouldn't have found with that person. Even if you're not going to agree on 100% of the issues, you can find areas of common ground.
Which is the conversation that one would miss if you're having, like, even if you're having a conversation via Facebook, it's like we all talk about it all the time. You can write a sentence, you can type out a sentence, and that sentence can be taken in about 50 different ways, and you just never know exactly what that is. So you're not actually connecting with that person and getting to know what they believe, how they believe, and that their world.
Yeah, and there's also a time pressure when you're there, and so someone responds to something you say, you feel the need to respond quickly, when really sometimes it actually takes time for us to put together our thoughts and to think about what we want to say, and the time pressure is really there, on Twitter as well, to respond quickly and instantly. And so, again, there's some really good uses for that idea of quick communication and response, but I think when it comes to really getting to know people and having intimate discussions with people who might be different than you, I think it's not as great of a format as just an in-person conversation would be.
Well, and I guess the thing that pops up immediately for me is that it's quick. It's very quick, and you can do it on your own time. And when you start to try and schedule things with other people, I don't know if it's just me or if it's everybody out there in the world, but it just feels like life is so busy with so many things that the idea of even planning, like, happy hour with a friend is like, it's almost stressful, because you're like, I don't know when I'm going to fit that in. And so, like, it's almost like that becomes social media, and connecting via the internet becomes the crutch to not have to deal with that.
Yeah, and this is brings up another point, or another kind of pillar in the book. So one of them is empathy, which we just talked about, and another one is the idea of focus, which is very hard to attain in a world where we can multitask. And on social media and our email and internet, it's really easy to multitask and we feel more efficient. And it's, in some ways, we might accomplish more on a particular type of task. But, most social science research shows that multitasking actually makes us less efficient and we accomplish less work than we would if we were to just do each thing, finish it, and move on. And so I think what's tough, like you said, is that we feel that if we apply this to our social life and we multitask with our social life, we'll get more done, we'll reach more people, we'll feel connected to more people. But of course, there's no substitute for going to a happy hour with a few friends and just spending the time in person with them. It's very different from having a Facebook chat with someone or from having an email chain with a few people. Nothing can really replace that in-person interaction.
Have you found that as a whole, I believe you and I are probably part of the same, well, close to the same generation, that people of our age just stay away from the phone too?
Yeah, which I think I'm just on the cusp of. I still actually prefer phone calls a lot. I think there's this like borderline, but I think it is true nowadays. People avoid phone calls and they'd rather text and they'd rather message. I personally think phone calls are much more efficient because I can just have a conversation, it's done, and move on. Whereas texting, it can drag on for a long time. Aziz Ansari has a really funny skit or kind of piece he has in his new book called Modern Romance. Where he's talking about it in the field of dating, but it's the same idea as Everyday Ambassador of, what has dating become nowadays? For us to just be texting one-off things to each other, not actually meeting up, rescheduling for another time, and all of this is happening in our phone, and instead of just actually going, meeting someone, spending time together. He says it much more entertainingly than I can.
Well, we'll find that and add it to the YouTube page. One of the things that I love that you do is like there's this conversation about technology is going on all over the place. It's everybody's saying you should disconnect, you should actually get to person, but you go one step farther in saying that by disconnecting you can actually make a bigger impact. And you can make a bigger difference by disconnecting. And can you explain that a little bit? Because even when I was first told that about your book, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. So the idea about disconnecting in order to make a difference is this idea that when we take some time to disconnect, whether we want to take a little bit of time every day or whether we want to dedicate one day a week to disconnecting, it's powerful because then it forces you to be in situations where you are humanly connecting. You're no longer having your human communication skills deteriorated. You're taking a break from that, and you're able to practice the skills that allow you to be a better connector. And the way that connects to making a difference in the world is, I've spent a lot of time in the past 10 years going around the world and helping out in different healthcare. I work mostly in healthcare, but being exposed to other types of development work like education, agriculture, other ways that people, I get exposed to a lot of foreigners who go places to try to help make that place better. Both abroad, people who go abroad to do that, and also I should say within America. And foreigners, not because you're both American, but you might be going to someone who's not poor going into a poor neighborhood to work. And a lot of us, and I'm sure a lot of people who read this book, are people who have that pro-social attitude of wanting to help others. The trouble is that with all that good intention, which I'm around all the time and I appreciate all the time, oftentimes it gets misguided because there's a lack of human connection. And what I mean by that is if you genuinely feel like you want to help people and you've designed your plan or your program of what you're going to do to which community to help, but you haven't actually spent time with people in that area, you haven't asked people if they even would like your help, you haven't assessed what the impact of your work is going to be and what the potential consequences of your work could be, like that actually doesn't happen a lot, unfortunately. And I'm not criticizing because I really think we should appreciate people's good intentions and nurture those and support those, but we all are responsible also for making sure what our good hearts are translate into actual good work. And unless you are connected to the people who you're aiming to lend a hand to, then you're really not able to make sure that what you're doing is actually welcome and going to make a difference. So when we're thinking about, how to call this book and what it's really about, it's about connecting in order to make a difference in the world, and how that really is the one key. If you want to make a difference and do something to improve the world, the only ingredient you absolutely need across the board, whatever your project is this idea that you have built a strong relationship with the community or the person where you're aiming to make a difference.
Can you tell the story, I believe it's in your book, about the group of well-wished good doers who were coming over to one of the organizations that you were working with, and it just became very obvious how disconnected they were from the people that they were trying to help?
Sure, yeah. So Whitney's referring to an anecdote I give in the book about when I was working in Indonesia at this community health center, and because so that sometimes there would be foreign volunteers who would come through for periods of anywhere from a week to 3 months, who were organized by different independent organizations, but this community-based health center was always open to receiving volunteers if people wanted to come and do something helpful. And so by the time I was there for a year, the people who worked there kindly assigned me the job of coordinating volunteers because I could speak English and Indonesian and make everything work. So this group came in. It was high school students who were from the U.S., who were from across Europe, from across even Latin America. They're actually from quite a few countries in the world. And they came and they arrived, about a group of 20 of them, and I sat in the lobby with them on their first day. They were going to be there for 3 weeks, and I just kind of asked them, like, what are you thinking you're going to do here? What's your plan? And each question I asked, they really didn't have an answer for. So, they wanted to do AIDS education in Indonesia, in schools. And, like, doing education is not a concept. Like, you could create a curriculum, or you could work with the school's health program. There's a lot of things you could do, but doing education is not a thing, and it's not a very thoughtful, well thought out thing. And then plus, if they had done some research to Indonesia, the HIV epidemic in Indonesia it's very concentrated, and it's mostly driven by injecting drug use and commercial sex work. And so any kids involved in those activities probably aren't in school anyway. So if you're going to school to do AIDS education, you're not even remotely addressing a population that needs your help. And then, like, how long you here? 3 weeks, but we want to make sure we get to Bali for the last part of the week because, if anyone comes to Indonesia for work, they always want to take a trip to Bali, which I get. It's beautiful. But, like, are you here to do work, or are you here to go on vacation? And it's okay if it's both, but just be clear about what you're able to offer this community and what you're not. And, like, no one had really read up on AIDS in Indonesia. No one spoke Indonesian. And not that you have to, but there wasn't even someone who was going to be able, they didn't know whether or not someone would be able to translate for them. So, like, lots of lack of preparation. And I think sometimes when people go out in the world to do good things, we think that the good intention is enough, and that just wanting to do good and bringing resources, whether it's money or supplies, is just good enough, when it's not. Like, we really should have a plan. We really should talk to people before we get there, make a plan together. People's time is valuable. Organizations who have to take on volunteers who aren't prepared end up spending more resources on the volunteers than the volunteers give back to them. And so it just kind of made me think, like, I actually, and I'm not criticizing them thinking that I'm above that. When I was younger, I certainly did the same type of thing. I wasn't aware. I wasn't really thinking about it. I really thought, oh, this is great. This is going to an exotic place, doing an interesting thing. It's good for my resume. I get to help people. But you didn't actually think about, like, who these people are and what their lives are like, and that they're real people, and their lives are going to possibly be worse off if you do something that detracts from their good work.
Well, and all of that you're encouraging people to think through. I think that for some people that can almost be the paralyzing point, because I think I have thoughts like that every once in a while, and then I'm like, oh yeah, no. Because and I completely understand and get, and I'm totally on board with what you're saying, because I do believe this. Like, it's very easy, unfortunately, to do harm to an organization or to a group of people that you don't really understand. Mm. So that deep connection and really being that everyday ambassador with them is incredibly important. But what would you suggest to somebody to get them past that moment of, oh no, I want to do good, I have really good intentions, and I don't know what to do next?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's kind of what's behind everydayambassador.org. And that's why, in addition to having the book, I wanted to have this website. And the website's actually been around for a few years as a resource site and as a site of curated resources for people who are interested in doing good in the world. And so if you go to our website, you'll actually see a list of partner organizations who we have vetted as people who really care about human connection and really, through the volunteer programs they run, are incredibly thoughtful, incredibly high quality. So that's kind of a short list people can get started looking at. But I think more importantly, what I try to encourage whenever I speak with people about Everyday Ambassador and what's in the book is that the four qualities that are at the heart of Everyday Ambassador are empathy, focus, which we talked about, also patience and humility. And there's a lot of detail in the book about each one of those four things. But really what I suggest to people is just think in your everyday life, even if you're not going to do a big project, it doesn't actually matter. You don't have to do a big project or travel to a foreign country to have a big impact in the world. And so you can be anyone with any type of job. And if you are kind to people and employ those four values in the interactions that you have, you're actually, in my opinion, making a bigger difference in the world than someone who sets up a large aid program but has not thought at all about any of these four values and has not made any connections. And so it's good enough. It's more than good enough to even start with the people in your everyday life and treating them with those values. And then, yeah, there's definitely on everydayambassador.org, and then through some of our partners, you'll also see their websites. There's definitely a community and a network of people who are onto this lead of human connection matters, and we really want to emphasize that and have that be the prominent part of our work.
So how would somebody, before I ask this question, I'm going to let people know about your book.
Oh,
and I know you haven't even gotten your own copy yet because it's not out. It doesn't come out until next Tuesday, but we're offering a deal for the show. If you go to beyondword.com/otto, OTTO, you can get 30% off the book. So it is now going to be $11.20. It's a great deal. And Kate's going to share more about the book, and she shared a little bit about the four core values. So we're going to talk more about those as well. But the question that I really have, and I ask this of a lot of our people, is how do you know when you are disconnected? Where is that moment? What are those things that you can look for? Because I guarantee you, just like I did at the very beginning of our conversation, it's like you say something and I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. That's totally me. When maybe in fact it's not.
I use those four qualities as my benchmarks. They're certainly not the only ones, but to go through those. So for the focus piece, I would say you might consider yourself being disconnected if you find yourself multitasking. And that is something I do literally every day is I walk down the street with my phone typing. And every other day, I almost run into someone. I need to stop doing that. I really need to stop doing that. But it's terrible, but I do it. And it's and I'm saying, I wrote this book not as the expert, as someone who never messes up on these things. I wrote this book as someone who really struggles with these things, but thinks there's value in overcoming them. So the idea of multitasking, and one thing I've gotten a little bit better at is browser windows, keeping those minimized. I used to have 50 open all the time, and I try to actually finish whatever it was I was doing before opening more. So anything around the idea of focus and multitasking, that's one. The idea of empathy, I would say just pay attention. Think about the last time you got in a disagreement with someone. It could be someone really close to you, it could be a partner or a family member, or it could be a stranger. And why did you disagree? And what was the heart of it that you really just weren't communicating and you really were missing each other's point? And if that is the case, then maybe this idea of empathy and building up those skills could be something helpful. Patience is the third one. So, I am very guilty of impatience, and we're used to things working so quickly in an online space, which is great. I get my weather for the morning. I can make a restaurant reservation. I can do my class schedule. Everything happens quickly. But people don't work quickly. Human emotions don't function quickly. They're complicated. Sometimes we take time to figure out how we're feeling about something. And I don't know about you, but I certainly have had situations where maybe I'm in a disagreement with someone, and more often than not a loved one and not a stranger. And it takes time sometimes to understand one another and to work through a relationship and to work through an issue. It doesn't get solved in one sitting, and that's not how our online world works. So I think if you ever find yourself being impatient with people, I would also kind of consider that a red flag. And the fourth kind of red flag is around the idea of humility. Another word I like to use for humility is teachability, the idea of being open to, being an eternal student, even when we're already adults or already have learned things. And so if you kind of ever find yourself in a position of not wanting to admit you don't know something, which, happens quite a bit, then I think that's another red flag. And, it happens to me a lot. If someone asks me a question, it's rarely easy to just look it up on Google and look up the answer. So, I was elementary and middle school student before search engines existed. So I do remember a time when you would actually have to go to a library and look up things. But now, of course, that's much different. And it's great that that's different. It's amazing and wonderful that we can all look everything up, and knowledge is, so universally accessible. But the dangerous flip side to that is we might get used to being in this position of, oh, hold on, let me just look it up. Again, like, human emotions don't work that way. You can't Google, why is my sister angry with me? Like, it's not, you might get some interesting things, but you're probably not going to get the solution to what you need. That requires you actually, sitting with a person and telling them, I don't understand what's going on, and can we talk about it? So some of these kind of interpersonal human skills are best practiced between people, and if we can recognize some of these red flags that are happening in our lives and take the time, whether it's by disconnecting or whether it's by staying connected but still being aware of them, I think is really healthy and really good.
One question that came up as you were sharing all those great things, because I'm sitting there going like, oh no, oh yes, okay. Thank you for that, because I those are great things to watch for, and I actually do see them in myself on a regular basis. And have you, as you've talked with people and shared with them and coached them, even in being an everyday ambassador, have you noticed that there seems to be just kind of an overall emotional numbing of people because they don't want to deal with the uncomfortable situations, or they don't have the patience to deal with the uncomfortable situations? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen both directions. I've seen the numbing direction and also the overexpression, kind of extremist expression of that. So both, it's just a lack of being able to manage emotions and thoughts, thinking that it's abnormal to have those emotions, which it's not at all, right? And so either people just kind of become numb to it, or people really overexpress and get so excited about something or so extremist about something that they don't need to be getting so excited about. But again, because the online environment fosters that sense of, let me have a loud opinion and a very specific opinion. And in a digital world of so many voices, you have to be loud and you have to be almost extremist to get noticed. And so, that it fosters that environment when really on a person-to-person basis, it's totally fine and normal to have a lot of emotions, but there's also really reasonable ways to manage that and to work on it between people.
And it also seems to foster an environment of everything's fine.
Well, yeah, of course. So like you said, Facebook's a great example of that. Again, I tend to really post things that are everyday ambassador related, and I kind of see Facebook as a way to share about that work and feature the people who we really think are great at EA. But a lot of people use it as a place where, here's the latest great thing I did, whether it's a great meal I had, or getting reunited with this friend, or I got married, or had a baby, or all these things, which is nice, because in a way it's just a public photo album. It's a public scrapbook of our lives, right? So we post the things that matter to us and that we want to remember, and those are normally the good things. Tons of crazy, awful things happen on a day-to-day basis, and I certainly have lots of things every day that are disappointing or make me feel sad or are challenging, but I certainly don't put those up on Facebook because, why would I? I don't really want anyone's feedback on it. It's something that I just kind of want to manage, but by default, what that does is it creates a space where if you get on and you look at other people's stuff, you think, oh, how great their life is. They don't have to deal with these things I have to deal with, which of course isn't true. They also are dealing with hard times and struggles. It's just that most people don't choose to post those things.
It's making me think of me in my life and how I even keeled I always try to be, and I don't take the time to deal with my emotions necessarily. And people will ask me, how was your day? And I'm like, oh, it was great. And they'll be like, what did you do? And I'm like, stuff. Because I don't know, maybe because I'm moving through it so quickly and I'm just trying to get things done that by the end of the day, I'm like, I did things. I don't know what they were, but I did things.
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? And you end up having a little bit less human interaction than you otherwise would when so much of the work we do is expected to happen at our laptops, at our computers, in digital spaces. I mean, I remember actually when I first started college, AOL Instant Messenger was like a thing that was still popular. It was right before Facebook became popular, but I think there's a comparison to Facebook now. But I remember being like on Instant Messenger when like someone who you had just met you were like chatting with who literally was probably sitting 2 rooms away from you. And even then it seemed bizarre to me. And that was kind of even before Facebook, but it's the same now. We'll sit and chat with people who are sitting feet away from us when you could also just go up and say hi. And some people will say like, oh, well, what does it matter? It's the same thing. You're just getting work done. But again, I go back to that quote of, technology is meant to connect us to people far away, not create distances between people who are close. It is great and it is fine when you're genuinely using it because you otherwise wouldn't be able to connect with or communicate with someone. But when it's basically just keeping you from a human interaction that you could be having, like let it go. Just like try to do it the human way if you can.
What advice do you have for people who maybe having that human interaction, be a phone call, in person, whatever? How do you have that conversation? I mean, so many of us are conditioned to have the text conversation, the email conversation, the thing that is one step away from me right here. And how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I guess I should also make a distinction here from that question between some people will say, oh, the things you talk about are really, really good for people who are extroverts, but not for people who are introverts, because actually technology provides a great platform for people who are introverts. To which I actually would respond, I would recommend a book that I'm sure you probably read called Quiet, which is about the hidden power of introverts, which really brings up, which I talk about in relation to Everyday Ambassador, because there's this stereotype that, introverts don't like people and extroverts love people. But it's not really exactly what it is. Like a lot of introverts absolutely love human interaction, but in a different way, and maybe in a one-on-one, quieter, less intense way, where an extrovert might enjoy spending time with a lot of people in a group setting that's loud, and all sorts of variations in between, because most of us are actually some combination of both of those and not one or the other. So I wanted to kind of put that before the explanation, because it's not necessarily that more human interaction is only good for people who are extroverts. It's more about figuring out a little bit about yourself and like what kind of person are you? Are you someone who enjoys lots of human interaction with lots of people at once, or more one-on-ones? So get to know yourself better and what types of interactions you like, and then seek those out. So certainly you don't need to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you're going to be not enjoying the interaction, but you can find ways based on who you are and what you like to interact. And of course, Everyday Ambassador is all about making a difference in the world. And so personally, I really feel, and I learned this through my own experience and have observed it in others, that engaging in work that is making the world a better place, so whether it's volunteering or whether it's lending a hand to someone who is in a time of need, I think those can be the most powerful. There's one example that I give in the book, and this is a really good example of kind of literally how anybody can be an everyday ambassador, is a story about a taxi driver in a city in the Midwest, and he went to pick someone up at a very late night call and, expected it to be a party or someone going home late, and it was this little old lady, and it took her like forever to like get to the door and get to the car, and he it was late. He could have just like left or not taken the call, but he's like, this could be my grandmother. How do I want her to be treated? Takes care of her, gets her in, and then he finds out that she basically is like dying, and she needs him to drive her to hospice care. And so, and she explained, I grew up in this city, and so I'm going to die in the city. He shuts off the meter. And he said, okay, where do you want to go? We'll go everywhere you want. We'll look at all the places where you used to work and where you went on your first date and where you did this. And he took her on a whole tour and then, brought her there. And that's like a perfect example of just a one-on-one human interaction that is, beyond words powerful. Like it's beyond anything I can say. And that was just like a person extending an immense kindness to another person. And you and me both have the power to do things like that. every single day. Literally, there's no shortage of opportunities to do things like that for people. But we won't find out about those opportunities unless we connect with people.
It just makes me think of, and it's so amazing because what you've been saying, it just connects so much with, there are those days when you just go through your life with your head down and you just get it done. You go through the grocery line, everything, you just trying to get everything done. And then there are those days where you kind of take a breath and you almost physically just raise your head up. You look at the people that you're interacting with, and maybe this is just me, but I can't help but hold the door open for them, actually really ask them, how are you doing? Like really just being with that person wherever they are and interacting with them in a way that, I don't know, sometimes I like to think makes a difference for them too.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. And you have no idea, too. Oftentimes you give that kindness to somebody and treat them like a human being, and then they're going to go do that for someone else. That's just how human behavior works. If someone gets treated a certain way and it's a good way, they're more likely to then go do good things for others. And unfortunately, it works in the opposite direction. When we're rude to each other, when we're, it's really hard. Like you said, sometimes you're just trying to get through your day. You've had a terrible day. You go to grab a coffee at the end of the day, and, the cashier gets it wrong, and you yell at them. Like, we shouldn't be doing things like that. And it's understandable why you do that, but if you do that, it ruins their day, they're mean to someone else, and it just sets off a ripple of that. Whereas the opposite, like you were saying, is just open the door for someone, be kind to someone, make the extra effort to do that, and then that is the thing that ripples out, and more people do that.
Well, and one of the things that you said in your book is that it's that moment of being focused on the bigger picture as opposed to on what's right in front of you, because when you're looking at that bigger picture, then you can see what is my yelling going to do for this person and what's going to happen next for them. Whereas, in your moment where you're just like, this is what life is throwing at me right now, you can't see beyond just, I'm angry and I'm going to give that to you.
Right. And what's interesting about it too is it's not just the idea that like by doing a good thing it ripples out and helps people. If you're having a bad day but you choose deliberately to fight against that sad feeling or bad feeling and do something kind for someone, even if you're not feeling it and even if you're not in the mood, that makes you feel better. Like that actually changes your mood and your attitude. So it doesn't feel in the same way that, sometimes you don't feel like going to the gym, but if you actually just go and go for a run or do it, you feel better. Your body thanks you for it. And so sometimes we have, especially on bad days, we have to just tell ourselves like, all right, get in gear, do this.
Well, we do have a viewer question. Before we go to the viewer question, I'll just one more time show off your beautiful book that's coming out next Tuesday. And again, you can get that for 30% off at www.beyondword.com/auto, OTTO. Be sure to go and grab your copy. The viewer question is, in my household, digital devices also seem to create the expectation for things to happen quickly. And if machines don't work properly, then they get angry. What do you think the impact is on patients' conflict resolution and the ability to deal with life setbacks?
Excellent question. Thank you so much, whoever sent that in. So, there's actually a really funny sketch by the comedian Louis C.K., which maybe we can also link to, and he very articulately and very entertainingly talks about how crazy it is that things that pretty much only recently got invented, such as the speed of digital communication, we take for granted so quickly. We start assuming is our entitlement and our right to have, and when they don't work or they break, we get so angry about it when, months or years prior it literally didn't even exist. So I recommend people Google that sketch. So yeah, I would agree with the viewer that both in households and also in workplaces, the idea that the expectation of things happening quickly because they happen on our devices quickly is a real thing, and it's a real challenge. And I say both households and workplaces because they're both places where relationships matter very much, and also where there's a lot of sensitivities and there's a lot of human emotion involved, at home with your family or at work with your coworkers. So it actually is very important to be able to have the skill of patience, as anyone knows who's listening who has a family or who works in an office. If you expect people to work as quickly as a device does, you're going to be disappointed. And also, the idea, the viewer brought up this issue of conflict resolution and being able to deal with setbacks. If there's anything that we can be sure about in our personal lives and our professional lives, it's that there's going to be setbacks, and that we're going to create plans and goals for ourselves, and there's going to be challenges and struggles, and there's going to be things that we did not expect that come flying into the picture, and we're going to have to deal with. And I think that people who are able to cultivate a sense of patience and are able, like we've been talking about, to see a bigger picture, to understand that sometimes taking a couple steps back to assess equals many more steps forward ultimately. I think people who have those skills are going to be very good at conflict resolution. And it's not just the idea of patience and the importance of being patient with people, but conflict resolution also has a lot to do with understanding someone else's point of view, and that gets back to kind of the empathy point. And again, in digital environments, we tend to be more extremist about things, or are conditioned to be a little bit more opinionated, when in reality, to solve conflicts and to solve when things go wrong, one of the best skills we can have is a skill of empathy, of trying to understand where another person or side is coming from. We'll much more quickly get to a solution if we arrive at problem solving with that in mind, with that tool in our tool belt of understanding how someone else is feeling, rather than just kind of single-handedly trying to fix it ourselves.
My question comes from a little bit of experience in this. I do my best. I do my best. Huh? I try to be empathetic as much as I possibly can, but then there are some moments, like, I also believe, like, if somebody yells at me and I have a response that is just full of empathy and generosity and love for whatever they're dealing with, that can help them reset as well. But sometimes I get really annoyed that I'm always the one doing that.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to be the one who is the empathetic one? Why do I have to be the one that lets things go or tries to see the bigger picture? Why does that always have to be me? How do you just keep going?
Yeah, well, I would say to keep being strong and keep doing it. It might not seem like it in the short term, but people learn by experience, and people learn by seeing how others respond to things. The way that you respond in those ways, even if there's one or two people who seem to be repeat offenders and you're the one who's always being empathetic and they're not, surely there are other people who are seeing what you're doing and they're taking notes and learning from that. And some people take a lot longer to change than others do, so I would say to just keep being consistent and keep doing what you're doing. And again, on the patience front, like, you can't always expect immediate outcomes to the work you're putting in, so it's really important to be a leader and emphasize these skills, but it's not sure that people are going to respond right away. Another thing I would say is that in both kind of households and workplace environments, I think that's why it's kind of more important than ever for these values of empathy and patience and focus and humility to be things that leadership, whether it's the head of a household or whether it's the head of an organization, exemplify and practice and expect of others, because sometimes it requires some authority too, saying, like, you will be rewarded for demonstrating these values. That can be a really powerful thing. So if anyone's listening who runs a team or runs an organization or has a family, I think, like, these are good things to think about in terms of the example you set for people who live in your household or work in your office or are members of your team, and that your example goes a really long way, oftentimes in silent ways, but people notice, for sure.
And I just, as you mentioned the four core values as well, that it makes me think on my question and just be like, well, okay, so I'm practicing the empathy, but not necessarily the patience, as you said, or the humility. So that's, I love those, that they just automatically work really quickly together. To, if you're feeling particularly put out by something, it's like, okay, look at these four core values and see which one of these are you not practicing in this moment. Is there some place that you could look that you could bring that to it and it would shift your perspective?
Yeah, and I think for each of us, we all kind of generally are just naturally better at some than others and naturally struggle more than others. And then also situationally, I think sometimes certain ones in certain types of situations are harder to attain than others. Like, for example, I think in professional environments, it's a lot harder to practice humility than it is in personal environments, because if it's just a personal relationship or discussion, both people see the value in the humility. The vulnerability is almost expected in an intimate relationship. Whereas in a workplace, vulnerability could be seen as a bad thing, and you're afraid of getting fired, or you're afraid of some kind of work consequence. So some of them situationally are harder to attain and think about than the other ones, but like you said, they are deliberately all created this way to work together, and there's a lot of synergy between the four. And so if you're able to kind of put all four into play and into balance, then I think it's pretty powerful.
Well, and I know you've actually done workshops with lots of large organizations and shared with them about Everyday Ambassador and the kind of contribution that it can have for their organization. What kinds of results have you seen from people incorporating that?
Yeah, so I had a really fun workshop recently at Davidson College, and they're a college that is especially known for their dedication to service and public service. So they have a large cohort of students who are going abroad for the summer, all to different countries, all working on different projects. And so I came to do a workshop with them, an Everyday Ambassador training workshop. And we'll kind of see what the actual results are at the end of the summer, and we come back and talk. But in terms of before, after the workshop, it was really interesting because I think a lot of the students just really hadn't thought about these questions before. They all had really interesting perspectives. They all were incredibly active in the conversation and had a lot to say about why these values matter and how they can imagine they're going to confront situations in their respective countries about these things, but they just had never been prompted to think about it before. And so I think even just the idea of being awake to these four specific values and how they apply to your life, and in particular in the workshops, I normally try to do workshops with a college or a workplace, some place where people are working on a project or some type of an application, something we can apply these principles directly to. So not just the general idea of why these are important in everyday life, which they are, but like specifically on a project that you're about to embark on, how you can transform your approach to what you're doing to kind of fit into these guideposts.
Is there a format or something that for somebody who's working on just about to take on a project that they could maybe use to see if they're incorporating all four core values?
Yeah, so actually I tried to include that in the book. So in the book you'll see that at the end of chapters about these different values, there's reflection questions that are, excuse me, both personal reflection questions, so things that are meant for you and your own meditative time and personal time that you're going to think about and find answers to. But then there's also questions intended for small groups, so things that you're not meant to just think about yourself, but actually discuss with other people, brainstorm with other people about. And then there's actually kind of action items and things that we can do in our everyday lives to start practicing these values more, and prompts for action items, no matter what your work or your job is. So so if you pick up the book, then you can kind of flip through and see, after you read about each of these values, you can see some exercises and questions that can help you do that.
I'll just show it one more time because it's beautiful. And again, you can get it at beyondword.com/auto for 30% off, $11.20. So it's a great deal. It just sounds like it could transform your entire workplace if there's something that you guys are somebody's dealing with. So I'd say that's probably worth $11.20.
Yeah, well, and especially too, I think workplaces and schools thankfully are getting so much more diverse nowadays. Thankfully, I mean, not as diverse as they should be, but they're getting there, and that's a good thing. And it's not just about racial diversity, but it's about religious diversity. It's about sexual orientation diversity, and it's about people feeling comfortable and equal in a workspace or in a school space. And that diversity is a beautiful thing, but I think we shouldn't underestimate how difficult it can be to operate as teams in situations of diversity. I think it comes naturally to a lot of us to say, like, of course, I love having a diverse group of friends, and it's important to me. Like, of course it is. For a lot of people it is, but when it comes down to actually achieving goals together and get it going through conflicts with other people, until we get to that point of conflict, we don't realize that having different backgrounds and perspectives and thoughts could be very difficult to manage unless we keep these kind of four ideas in mind. They really help to get you through situations that otherwise seem a bit unmanageable, and they're only going to become more common as our workplaces and schools become more diverse places.
Well, and I would believe that it would help you also relate to them, not as perhaps a stereotype that you've become really familiar with online in some way, shape, or form, but it actually helps you connect to them as a person and ask the questions that understand them as, John, the the Hindu person who moved here from India 5 years ago who works with me for 2 years, whatever that is. But it's like understand him in particular as opposed to all Indian people in the entire world.
Exactly. Yeah. Like stereotypes are most often not true, as we all know of anyone. Both. I both experienced that as someone who has friends and coworkers from different parts of the world, and they might have stereotypes cast upon them when they're here in the States. But for myself as well, when I travel and go places, people have a lot of stereotypes about me as a white American woman, and so it goes both ways. Like, I don't want people assuming things about me, or just because I'm American, assuming that I believe certain things or that I stand for certain things that my government does. So I think the idea of just being able to connect with someone and get to know them as a person is hugely helpful to being able to operate well together, whether it's something that's professional or whether it's classroom based or whether it's just your home and your group of friends. But yeah, you're right. Like, not seeing people as stereotypes, and hoping that other people don't see you that way as well.
Well, and it's becoming aware that you have a belief in a certain stereotype. There's something that I've talked to with several people on this show is just becoming, and as you said, it's just awareness. It's knowing yourself and knowing what's coming from you, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't think that I believed that about all Native American people or whatever else. It's becoming really getting to know you in a lot of ways while also getting to know other people through that connection.
It really is, and and that really was one of my biggest lessons learned in a lot of when I was still in college and had the chance to travel and volunteer in different places. That's really what hit home with me, was how similar I was to people who originally I kind of thought I was quite different from. And one example I like to give, I'm not sure, she might be listening, we were just WhatsApping before this, but a friend of mine named Glory, who is from Tanzania, and when I was, I want to say 17, I'm sorry, I was 20. When I was 20, I was living in Tanzania for a summer, and I was doing an HIV education program with teenagers in the community at high schools. And this young woman, Glory, was in one of the cohorts I was working with, very bright, very smart, had a great time that summer, and then really never talked again until she emailed me about a year later saying that she was trying to graduate from high school, but that her school wasn't letting her because she still owed school fees. And I didn't realize at the time that she actually was from, she doesn't have a mother, she has a very poor family situation, she just couldn't afford to pay pretty much a couple $100s to graduate. She's brilliant, she's so smart. So, I happily paid that for her, and then we talked about what next, and in kind of talking and connecting about what she wanted to do next with her life, I realized we were the same person. She wanted to go to college, she wanted to be a leader, a female leader, she cared a lot about helping other people, and so otherwise someone who I kind of, a young woman in Tanzania I would have thought whatever about, but we've become literally best friends. We text all the time. And so what we did, and this is a good testament to the power of technology, through crowdfunding websites, my friends and I crowdsourced her college education. So she just graduated from college last year, and she's just so amazing. She's on fire and doing great things. Now she's working and helping people there. And but the idea that we were able to connect because we didn't see stereotypes about each other. We just saw each other as two young women who both have similar ambitions in the world and connected on that.
Well, and it really is an incredible thing that you do have this amazingly close relationship with somebody who is halfway across the world that before technology, before the internet and all of the stuff that came with it, you would never be able to have. I mean, you could write letters, but it'd be months in between.
Yeah, and it's really powerful that anytime there's good news to share or bad news to share, we can just text each other, we can WhatsApp each other, we can send a video, send Facebook. It's really beautiful. It's really incredible. And, again, when technology lets you be close to people who are far away, that's when you're using it the right way, and that's when it's a good thing.
Yeah. And we do have one more viewer question. How do you help your kids to look up and look out once in a while, and to help them understand that all knowledge does not reside on a computer screen?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. And it is a really important question because my generation, Winnie, our generation, we kind of were on the borderline. Like, we definitely grew up as children in a world where this was not the norm. And so I think a lot of my perspective on writing about this comes from having grown up without all of it and seeing the opposite side. And certainly my parents' generation really, really understands the value of human connection and the world before all this. Kids who are kids right now are growing up around it, and any generation into the future, it's just inherently part of their upbringing. No matter how their parenting is in the household, they're going to be exposed to it in school and with their friends and at their friends' houses. So I appreciate this question because I think it's a very real struggle. I think it's going to be a very real obstacle. And so the advice I would give is to do your best to engage your kids in activities that are offline, to expose them to different lifestyles and viewpoints, whether you're actually able to travel somewhere together, whether you go on some type of a volunteer activity together. Doing something with your kid to the extent you can, I think, is a really powerful thing. Just to show, I think people, whether you're a child or you're an adult, I think you learn very well when you experience something, and so it is tempting to think that all the knowledge lies on the computer screen. And so if you can figure out a way, whether it's like a person that you'd like your child to meet, an experience you've had that was particularly powerful that you think would be powerful for them too, to just get them offline and bring them somewhere to do that, and then afterwards, reflect on it and have a conversation about it. I think there's also, I have to say, I am not a mother, so I don't want to overstep my anything I'm going to say about parenting. I have an amazing mother. I have an amazing father as well, but I'm not one myself. But I know, like, I grew up having family dinners. Like, we definitely weren't allowed to have cell phones at the table, although those only came around when I was at the very end of high school. But we definitely needed to be sitting there in person. And so if you can create some pockets of time in your day in a family time that are offline and that there's no devices, I think that can be powerful too, by just setting a norm in the household that this is something we value as a family.
Well, and I could see, and I'm not a mother either, but I could see the value in taking on those conversations in that family dinner, that maybe you're not the just, how was your day? But it's like actually asking them, here's this thing that's going on in the news. Have you heard about it? What do you think about it? Like with your kids, because I think we have a tendency to just be like, they're kids, they don't know.
Right, but they know so much, and they have so many opinions, and there's so many things they think about every single day. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and there's genius ideas that come from kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because to them it's just simple. We have all of these considerations and thoughts and stuff about how to do something, and they're just like, or you could just do this.
Uncluttered, yeah, of course.
Absolutely. Well, Kate, it's been absolutely phenomenal to talk with you, and I'm just curious, do you have an anecdote, a story about somebody in particular who you see as just an absolutely amazing everyday ambassador that's gone out and made a really big difference in the world? Or a tiny difference that's just beautiful, like the cab driver?
Yeah, I mean, the cab driver is a perfect example. I filled the book with examples of people at all different, I don't want to say levels. It's not that people are above or below. It's just all different types of everyday ambassadorship. And I did that deliberately. So it's not, there are some people in that book who started an NGO and who started an organization and traveled to a far-off country, and it's amazing and their work's incredible. But there's also a lot of people in that book who, like, started a garden that ended up feeding people who were in a mental health institution who didn't have access to good food, or like literally just started a garden and that changed a lot of things, or just gave someone a cab ride. And I would say that when you're thinking about the role models of everyday ambassadorship, they're more often than not quiet acts that people don't necessarily tweet about or make a big deal about or post on Facebook. And they're the kinds of things that you're going to go out and do, and maybe no one's ever going to know you did them other than that person who you interacted with, and that's okay, and that's great. And I think to get away from this world where we think we need to kind of broadcast and share everything that we're doing, to get to a space where we feel happy and comfortable interacting with people simply for the sake of that interaction and how that allows us and that other person to grow, I think is really what Everyday Ambassador is all about.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a delight. You're so wonderful.
You're amazing. And I just want to let everybody out there know, there's no reason you would find this out, but Kate not only just wrote a book, but she is also going through medical school right now, and she travels all over the world to help people with healthcare education. So it's just, she's a remarkable, remarkable young woman, and it's just such an inspiration and makes me feel like I have not done anything with my life just yet. So just make sure you go out and you grab this book, because it is well tested, it is proved, it is and it's got some great examples of amazing things that people can do to make a difference. I know that I'm gonna definitely go be a lot nicer to people. So thank you, Kate. And just to let everybody know, next week we're going to have our new author, Patrice Vecchioni, on the show. She just wrote a book called Step into Nature, and she will be working with us on how nature can support you in your life, and how nature just isn't that stuff where you go drive 2 hours and get into the forest, but really just stepping outside your front door, and how you can connect with nature as easily as that. So we'll see you guys here same time next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.